Welcome to the Rebel Teacher podcast. And I'm here today with Mike Yates of the School Sucks podcast. And this is a especially exciting episode for me, not only because I love the School Sucks podcast, and I can't get enough of Mike's episodes, but also because we are introducing Mike to the Rebel Teacher Network. He's going to be one of our podcasters here, and we're really, really happy to have the School Sucks podcast as a part of the network. So Mike, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself a little bit. Thanks for being on the show. What is it that led you to setting up the School Sucks podcast, and what is it that rings a bell for you with the Rebel Teacher Network?
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for the extending the opportunity to be a part of the Rebel Teacher Network. So, I had talked about starting a podcast for a long time, and I work at a school where we do a lot of project-based learning, and I decided to create this workshop teaching kids how to use podcasting to create influence online.
Right.
I have this thing against business professors that have never started a successful business. And as the time drew closer to planning and running that workshop, I thought, I don't want to be that guy. And so it was that pressure. And then in the same week, I saw there's a guy named Mark Metry on LinkedIn and also everywhere else. Mark is the author of a book called Screw Being Shy. He's the host of Humans 2.0 podcast. And he was like, what's stopping you from starting a podcast? Just like on LinkedIn. I was like, okay. Then the next day, a guy named Jordan Paris, who's the host of Growth Mindset, he throws out a poll that was like, have you thought about starting a podcast? I responded yes. And then he messaged me and was like, Mike, why haven't you? It's like, okay. So then I started it like literally that day.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So the hope with School Sucks is just to have as many conversations, both like with guests, but also like breaking down data, jumping into videos. I became sort of obsessed with this idea of interviewing people that I actually can't get close to by using what they've said already on the internet, right? Just using their YouTube and commentary about it, because that's easy to do.
Sure. Yeah. No, I like that. And yeah, I do guest interviews and guest episodes. Is probably what I do most of all. And so I particularly enjoy watching some of yours when it is just yourself going through, exploring an idea, or like you say, breaking down some data, or responding to a quote or a concept. I think you bring a lot of energy to that, and I like the the perspectives that you bring. So that's particularly interesting for me. Something I've not spent a lot of time with yet. Doing the solo podcasts. So it's something I might explore in the future. But it's great to have you here, and to have you on the podcast, bringing something that definitely is in line with the the Rebel Teacher philosophy, but is also a little bit different, just given your own background. It turns out, I was just looking through the guest list, as it were, the other day, and realized, by no intention whatsoever, the vast majority of the people that I've spoken to have been English, like myself. So it's great to speak to somebody who's not. Although there are more now, there's a bit more diversity now, but it's been a heavily Anglican podcast, I noticed. So it's good to have a slightly different voice on. But what about the the name School Sucks? That rang out to me very quickly. I saw you on LinkedIn sharing, going live, and jumped on the live chat there. I just was really interested in what you were talking about. But why did you choose the name School Sucks?
For a couple of reasons. The first is because I said it a lot growing up. I hated school growing up, and I do this thing now with students. So the school where I work, there's no direct instruction. Kids learn math, science, reading, writing from adaptive learning apps. And I'll often walk around and just to mess with students, I'll be like, dude, science sucks. Like, it's like school sucks, right? And our number one objective at our school is to have kids love school. So
Right. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
mess with them, and they're all like, we're always messing around, but it's something that I've just said so much. The other reason why I use the name is because there's another podcast that's called It's called School Sucks,
Okay.
conversations about higher education. Um, but the podcast is like actually about everything that's great about school.
I
And
see.
yeah, and I was like, come on, man. But really, I mean, it's just the most like it's the way to sum up the way I feel about the traditional school system, and it's also it's words that I hope that students never say.
Yeah, no, that's great. So your title is more like, no, really, school actually sucks. Yeah. What do you think about that? I think that's really interesting. So this other podcast that exists that spends a lot of time talking about the positives. You are out here saying, unfortunately, right? Not because we're happy about it, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, school does actually suck. And pointing out some of the negatives, pointing out some of the problems. How does that ring with the audience and some of the conversations you have online? I occasionally will be told that I'm too negative, which I don't think is true. And most of the people who, spend time engaging with me would also agree is not true. But I do tend to look at the negatives, right? I spend a lot more time talking about the negatives and what's wrong and why it's wrong and how we can fix things than I do praising the positives. And I think you're similar to me in that regard. So what kind of response do you get for that?
Some very similar. Like I get a lot of people that are actually like around education, but not in education, push back. Sometimes parents actually.
Right.
My goal in life is to make parents upset, because oftentimes in school, what is best for kids makes parents really nervous and really upset.
Right.
So I actually use like upset parents as a tally to see whether I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I have all that. I have heard people talk about the negativity. And so I actually recently started doing this thing where every week I started highlighting a school that I thought was doing really cool work.
Oh, okay.
3 weeks in, I realized like nobody's really reading these, because
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
the truth is that nobody cares. Like people themselves. What I found is that the comments that I got on those online were almost they were almost cynical. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, glad that exists in Portland, Oregon. Why can't my
Right.
kid
Yeah.
go there? So I was like, I don't know how much people say they want to hear positivity, but when it
Yeah.
comes to school, I think that this content is needed, right? And it's the negativity that we both bring, I think is actually needed to wake people up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, for as long as it's getting pushback, that's a sign that we need to be talking about it. Because if
Yep.
people don't see it, then somebody's got to highlight these problems. I think, and I think it's probably the fact that, I mean, there have always been some outspoken voices. You can pick out some famous names over history who've written books. There have always been the critics of mainstream education, but it's always been a fringe effort, right? It's always been some kind of solitary writer, usually somebody a little bit kind of socially unaccepted for one reason or another, throwing stones from the outside. And they'll sell some books, but it doesn't, unfortunately, have much of an impact. And for as long as that's the case, there need to be more of us making those noises, I think. And if people all agreed with every post that I wrote, then that would presumably mean my job is done, right? Oh, good, everybody is on board, we're done. But
Exactly.
as long as people don't agree, then those are the people that I'm actually speaking to. And sometimes I'll post something and only get agreement and only get positive comments and only get, yeah, great, absolutely wonderful, completely agree with you. And I think, okay, well, this has been a waste then, because I'm preaching to the choir. And one of my goals with the network here, with the Rebel Teacher Network, is to hopefully broaden that reach a little bit. And the goal is to identify on the one hand, people who are on board that we can, bring into the movement and start collaborating with and supporting their efforts, and just trying to build that supportive network and community. But also, what the rebellion side of the network is about really is, getting to those people who don't yet agree and
Right.
changing their minds. The idea is we're growing the movement not just by preaching to the choir, but by converting those who are not yet on board. And that takes a bit of conflict, it takes a bit of combat.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's especially well, I can only speak to what I know for sure. Is in the U.S., a lot of people think that these like cries for school reform are new,
Yeah,
and it's great that you said, like, I mean, what's the most interesting is that the machine that we're fighting against in the U.S. was created by school reformers in the 1800s, like
right.
the common school. Those were the crazy people of the day. But way that I put it is like, okay, so we know that since formal education has existed, there's been voices that are like, no, this needs to change, but nothing's changed in over 100 years.
Right,
That
exactly right.
we,
Yeah,
we have to be
yeah.
louder. So yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder what you think as well. I wonder if you've heard this or if you've experienced this. I tend to get a lot of comments and a lot of responses that suggest I'm focused on the past. That what I'm saying is, oh yeah, that used to be true, but things have changed since then. Now, and I'll get references to maybe some curricula like the IB, which we talked about a bit ago as well. And they might point to the odd school, for example, a school like yours. They might point to these things and say, look, teachers are already doing this. This is already happening. We already believe in critical thinking in schools. The Common Core already does this, already says that. And what I find is usually the case is there's a lot of lip service. Something might
Yeah.
be written into a curriculum, but it's not happening in the classroom. Or, teachers might be getting a particular qualification, but they're not really implementing it in any meaningful way in the classroom. We're not seeing any real change in the education that the students are receiving. So I see that that's one of the barriers I come up against is people think I'm lying or I'm holding on to problems of the past that we've already solved. I very much think these problems are still current and still present now.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. I get that a lot too, where somebody will quote, they'll cite some random school. One time, somebody did it with my school and didn't know that I worked there. Like, oh, there's this guy that's using eBay in Austin to teach kids. I was like, yeah, that dude is me. Like, I know that article.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do when somebody says, oh, like somebody's already doing that in France, I go, great. Give me 5 other schools that are doing it as well.
That's it. Yeah.
Because the list is short, and that effort where I was trying to highlight great schools, I also stopped because I ran out of schools.
That's what I thought you were going to say the first time you said, and 3 weeks in, I realized I'd already run out. Yeah.
Like there's just not enough. And so it was like that was the shortest series I ever did.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah. And they're always, the leaders of these institutions or these startups or whatever, they're always the same kind of person, right? So it's there's a handful of people out there like you and me and other members of the network and other people that I haven't yet met. There's a handful out there who care about this and who are passionate about this, but they all also feel the same way that I think you and I do, which is kind of banging our heads against the wall a bit. I care about this, I'm passionate about it, and I'm trying to do something about it. And so are other people, but we feel like we're up against it. We feel like we're pushing up a mountain. And that's not how it should feel, and that's, again, part of what the network is about, hopefully bringing together some people like that. I'm really happy to now be connected with you, somebody who, we can have these conversations and not feel completely like we're wasting our time. We
right.
can share ideas and, together we can maybe turn ideas into something real, which is really hard to do when you're one person fighting against the tradition in a small area or, in some isolated, obscure school that no one's heard about yet. It can be quite demotivating.
Yeah, I mean, very, very true. I mean, it's, I am fortunate that I work in a situation that is one of a kind. It is really unique. We have an extremely generous funding source
Good.
that puts no limits on us. We are about to open 3 new schools by fall
Oh, that's
2020,
great.
and it's just like that is encouraging. You know, but I'm also fortunate that like outside of there, I have a few people that they like they will call me with crazy ideas, and I'm like,
Right,
is
right.
like, of course, let's do it, you know. But at the same time, like it is lonely. Even inside the walls of my own school, I still can't convince anybody else. Like I've been working at the school for 3 years. I can't convince one other person to get on LinkedIn and talk about what's happening.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, like we have a staff now of over 35. Like, and we will have 3 schools next year, and I cannot convince one other I am the only person at our school that is online, like fighting this fight.
That's
Um,
crazy.
you know, it kind of is. And, you know, for a lot of people that I work with, and this is, this actually makes sense to me. A lot of them, they say to me like, no, this is what I always wanted to do. I wanted to work in an environment like this. And I'm like, oh, that, you know, that makes sense. Like,
Yeah,
it's what I've always wanted as well, but I also want
yeah.
every other world to, like, I want everybody else
Exactly
to.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I can't criticize them or knock them for that, but it is sometimes it does feel lonely.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, something you just said was, I think, really important. You said about people who get in touch with you and ask, you know, oh, I've got this idea. Is this possible? That question, I think, is the key question. Perhaps the I think that's requires some thinking. I think spend some time, and I will over the next few days, perhaps spend some time on thinking about that question, because I think a lot of teachers, there are teachers out there who would agree with what we're talking about here, and, you know, agree with a lot of the content that's going out on the Rebel Teacher Network and the podcast that you're running and some of the conversations you're having with guests. You know, there'll be teachers out there who agree with the ideas, but feel like it's impossible when it comes to trying to implement it in their school. And that
Right.
question of, is this possible? You know, it feels like the answer is always no, because the institution or the curriculum or the system can feel so oppressive. And I think we just need to get more teachers thinking about that question of what's possible, and realizing that a lot more is possible than it often seems, you know, and starting with something small can turn into something big.
Yeah, I mean, in the U.S. it is, and I'm sure this is this way in other places, but the financial investment and the money that is tied into keeping the school system the same
Mm-hmm.
is, it is nauseating and sickening, and it scares a lot of people away. And so
Yeah,
I
right.
think it's like the most important thing that we can do on the Rebel Teacher Network is to relentlessly proliferate this message so that people know that it's possible. Because I was telling a friend of mine, my friend Tim, who's CEO of Guide, we were just talking about,
Yeah,
um,
that's him.
and Tim and I were like, look, one of these days, one of us crazy educators is going to get funding from some very generous person,
Right, right.
and it's going to be, I mean, then we're going to see major change. Like,
Yeah,
one of us is going to figure this out financially, because that's
yeah,
the big
yeah. That
hurdle.
is, you're right. You're so right about that. Yeah. I think the other thing as well, you know, this isn't true for everybody, but it's true for most of the people that I've been speaking with in the last few months while we've been setting up the network. And it certainly seems to be true for you. You know, we're teachers, we're educators, we are in it for, essentially, for the students. Right now, you know, some of the educators on the Rebel Teacher Network are working in primary schools, right the way through to some who are working in colleges, and others who are working in, you know, adult education in various ways. So we've got a wide range of what we mean when we talk about students, but ultimately it's the students that we care about. I do
Right.
most of my work with teachers, so my students are teachers, but I work with them for the sake of their students, right? It's all about getting a better level of education out there for the students to benefit from. But for that reason, because that's what we care about, and because that's who we are and what our backgrounds are, none of us are really in the business of empire building, right? We're not corporate minded in the way that other industries would have us be. Now I think that's essentially the soul of what the Rebel Teacher Network is. We're educators at heart, and we're trying to develop education. But it also means that most of the people that I've worked with and been speaking with recently, we're not in it for our personal name to get big, right? So as you just said, one of us will work this out, right? One of us will attract that funding or get that project started. But the great thing about the network, what I hope it remains, is none of us as individuals, I think I can speak for everybody else on the network when I say that doesn't need to be me, right? If it's somebody else, I'm just as happy. And the more people that we can connect with, and the more we can get this voice, or the more voices we can get that are talking in this way, the more chance there is that one of those people will be the person to make it happen, to make it work. And if that's not me, but I can help it be somebody else, then I'm just as happy. It's got to happen somewhere, right?
Exactly. The probably the greatest thing that I've ever learned about building a school has come recently. I have this relationship with the director of our school, Alpha, where I literally just decided, like, whatever I want to know, I'm just going to ask him. Like anything from, like, dude, who are you really? Like, where did you come from?
Right.
Where is our funding? Who, like, who, everything. And recently we were having this conversation. He said the most interesting thing to me. He said, look, like the most important part about our school is that we have zero ego when we do this. He's like, there's never a need for us to come out and say, look at our model because it's so much better than everything else. And he's like, if you think about it, nothing that we do is proprietary on purpose.
Right.
Because we hope somebody's like, oh, there's this little school, like, let's do the same thing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
he was like, you should keep posting about it. Like,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
We hope somebody catches it. We had a superintendent from this from a school district in North Dakota who actually was an assistant speech coach of mine when I was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's how he found us. And he's like, look, like, tell me about your model because I want to bring it to all of the public schools in this. And this is the superintendent, the guy with.
He really can do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like that was the first time that I, since my time there, that somebody reached out and was like, yo, I'm interested in doing what you're doing, but it's the guy who can actually push. And so, yeah, I think it's like the most important thing that I think we can do is not hold our ideas so tight. It's to free them away because it's about students.
Yeah, that's so important. And again, I'm really glad you said that, because I think that's something else that will resonate with a lot of the people watching this and a lot of the network members. Certainly for me, that everything you've just described is really describes my journey to setting up my own institution here in Indonesia. Doing what I do, I now do, I've set up my own institution to do it, because for the last decade, I found myself working at different schools and different institutions where I just could not gel with the owners, with the management. And you talked about funding, asking your principal or the the leader of your school about the funding. That's a question I've asked so many times when I've been working with other institutions. I've said, look, what kind of budget do we have? I want to see the books, not because I want to get my hands on the money, not because I'm being nosy, but I want to know, what can we do, right? What's the potential that we have here? And in order to know that, I want to have a sense of how the institution's running. And I've always found that those two things have been kept completely separate. There's one set of people in charge of the money, the corporation, the contracts, and everything that makes up the business. And then there's another set of people in charge of the education. And keeping them separate has been a problem, because you're blind on the education side. You're blind. You don't know what your limits and your possibilities are. And also, because of the commercial sort of capitalist model that it's all built in, unfortunately also means that the business side is usually the side that's in charge. And so at some
Right.
point, the education side, I kind of think, well, we're a school, we're supposed to be about education, but actually at the back end, it's about the business, right? And so I've just time and time again, I found myself working in an institution where at some point I've come up against that business model. I've not known what's going on behind the scenes, but whatever's going on behind the scenes secretly is in charge of me, and is limiting me. And it's ultimately why I set up my own institution, was so that I could just know everything about what's going on, and I could make those decisions, and I would know what possibilities and what limits I have. And it's been hard. It's harder doing it by yourself, and it's harder when that funding isn't coming from somewhere else, somewhere secret, but somewhere. So it's been harder, but it's also been a lot easier in terms of there's no conflict anymore. I know that I'm doing things for the right reason. I know that I can divert and direct the funds where they should be, and be asking the right questions on the business side as well as the education side. And so the fact that you're in a school that allows you to think that way, I think is really valuable. But I also think that what we've said here will probably resonate with a lot of other people who kind of have a sense that something's up with the way a lot of schools are running themselves, and what their priorities behind the scenes, what their priorities seem to be.
Absolutely.
So I wonder if, as we finish off, can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the guests you've had on the podcast? Because I've watched a lot of your, I don't think I've seen all of them yet, but I've watched a lot of your episodes, and you've had some really interesting conversations, some guests that have been, quite unique, quite interesting. So can you tell us maybe some of your favorite guests, or some of the nuggets of wisdom that you've got out of some of the guests you've had on?
Oh yeah. My first guest on the show ever was a guy named John Marty. John is he's a LinkedIn top voice. He's one of the top 20 YouTube accounts to follow for job seekers. John is absolutely phenomenal, and he and I connected through a mutual friend on LinkedIn, and have been just for the last year. Really, about 2 years ago when I got into this journey, I reached out to him and was like, "Hey, man, like, what's the top 5 things I need to know?" And without like hesitation, he like gave me those top 5 things. Within the next week, like, we got on a phone call and we talked about school for an hour and like homeschooling, And so on the episode that we talked about the college system, and how there is very little correlation between the actual work that you're doing in college and the job that it says it's preparing you for. So I you have to to make the most out of college. This is sort of like what we came out with. You yourself have to be creative about what you take. Like, for example, when I was in college, I actually knew I wanted to work in education. I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher, but I knew I wanted to work in education. Okay. So I majored in applied sociology and communication studies, because I knew 2 things. I knew that teachers are performers. We are communicative, so we need a communication background. I was also on the speech team, so I had to be. But then sociology prepared me in this very unique way, because I wanted to be able to. A lot of people think sociology is just like sitting in a coffee shop for 8 hours, and it is that. I actually did.
It's the best part of it.
Like, I wrote this ethnography, comparing Starbucks to like smaller coffee shops, and
right.
about third place and all that. But the data was what was most interesting to me, is that you can use people as data and figure out how to make the best decisions on behalf of people by what they do. And so I became really obsessed with that. And now that I work in a school that is that, like, it is literally quantitative data and combining it with qualitative data. So that school experience, it was the best. But I lucked out with that. Nobody told me. Nobody was like, Mike, I lucked out. Another interesting guest I had is Tim Salau. Obviously, like, Tim's a friend of mine. He's he's co-founder, CEO of Guide. And also he just launched a line of tea, a line
Yeah,
of
I saw
loose,
that.
yeah, big
Yeah.
black tea. Tim is an
There's
entrepreneur.
a man who takes an idea or an interest that he has and finds a way to share it with the world, right? I mean, the fact that he likes tea, and then the next thing you know is he's got a tea brand, and it looks great. No, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks super cool, and he's probably gonna crush it. But well, actually, interestingly enough, Tim and I, one of the things that we talked about was was college again,
Uh-huh.
but the underlying premise of like why college exists at all, which
Hmm.
is like the conveyor belt, and you're like promised
Yeah.
a job, and
Yeah.
that's like bad. It's a bad value prop because
Absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
it's so disconnected. And so um, I'm looking forward to having a couple guests, two in particular. One who I've got to schedule the official time, but he's already agreed. Jordan Paris from Growth Mindset
Oh, cool.
University
Wow. Yeah.
be on, and I am about to. I'm sure she's going to be down, but Lindsay Todd, who is
Oh,
this,
yeah. Yeah. I see her. Yeah.
Lindsay's phenomenal. She's doing a lot. She actually is a part of one of the people behind Tim's line of tea. So yeah,
Oh, is she really? Because I first met her, I say digitally, through Tim's guide app. So that's where I first came across her. I didn't know she was involved in the tea as well. That's interesting.
yeah, yeah. Lindsay and I have a lot of mutual friends from
Okay.
like different places in our lives. Like it's cool. So
Okay.
I'm on. So
Oh, that's
she'll
cool.
yeah, her and Zach, her husband, they'll both be on. So
Great. Oh, that's really good. Well, I look forward to those episodes, and people should check out the ones you mentioned and the rest of them as well. And now they can do that as a part of the Rebel Teacher Network. So I'm really excited. I'm really grateful that we have you on board, Mike. It's been great speaking with you, and I look forward to the projects that we can work on together in the future.
yeah, same here. Super excited.